Hello and welcome. You're watching Head to Head on UATV. The Ukrainian parliament extended the law on the special status of the Donbas for another year. The pro-presidential faction maintains that the original version of the law has not changed and notes that the extension of the law was agreed on during the Normandy Format meeting on December the 9th. During the discussion in Paris, Ukraine and Russia also agreed to implement a comprehensive ceasefire by the end of the year, exchange all political prisoners and withdraw forces from 3 areas along the front line in the Donbas. But what do the Paris talks mean for the Russia-Ukraine peace process? Well, I'm pleased to say, to discuss this and more, we welcome to our studio today Maria Kucherenko. She's an analyst at the Center for Civil Society Studies. Hello, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for the invitation.
So during the recent Normandy Format talks, Angela Merkel said that the extension of this special status for the Donbass was one of the most difficult parts of their negotiations. Why do you think that is?
That is because of the difficult situation with that law at all, because this point is one of the most sufficient for Russian Federation. As I said, as mentioned, President Putin, the special status is the main thing for Russia and main thing which they want from us. But still, if we will turn to the current situation on the bordering line, the line of contact, we will see that we are so far for being controlling these areas, and that's why we can't adopt this law in a practical way. This law is only the frame of the future when we will gain the control over these currently occupied territories. And for Ukrainian side, it is always painful question to say something about this special status, because the most of Ukrainians are not agree with that situation when the occupied areas gain this special status on that conditions which were described in that document. But still, now we can see that this document is unworking, and that's why it's not so dangerous for Ukraine to prolong it for one more year. I think the more dangerous situation will be if we will try to make quickly some new law on the special status, which can be some surprise for us and some surprise also for all our partners. And that's why I think it's one of the measures which not leading us to the conflict resolution, but...
And Russia could also take advantage, potentially, if it was rushed as well. We actually have some reaction from the Verkhovna Rada after this was discussed. Now we have a synchron from one of the lawmakers from the pro-presidential Servant of the People party, so we can have a listen now.
Closer to the next Normandy meeting, we will see progress on the implementation of the agreements made at this meeting, and will move on to the specifics. At a minimum, it is necessary to hold a prisoner exchange and stop the shelling. These issues will also be discussed by the Trilateral Contact Group.
So there's a lot of different issues happening here all at the same time. Of course, the special status itself, if I'm not mistaken, it's really one of a dozen points that was made in the original Minsk agreements by Petro Poroshenko. And if I remember rightly, in Minsk 1, there was the idea that Ukraine should be able to regain control of the local government buildings in Donetsk and Luhansk regions, also should be allowed to broadcast freely. But does the special status affect that at all? And for our audience who perhaps don't know much about what the special status means, how does it affect Ukraine, and what sort of concessions should there be?
The special status will affect on that territories only in that case if we will see the occupation of that territories, because now it is no reason to say something about this special status before the troops of Russian Federation are occupying these territories, and that's it. And if it will be adopted, if will be working, the special status will give these territories a lot of new rights, a lot of new rules, but this special status is also a part of Steinmeier formula, so-called Steinmeier formula. And if we will turn to this formula, we will see that special status will be given on the permanent basis to all these territories only after having an elections. But before we will have an elections, as you have already mentioned, we need to renew the control over that territories. We need to renew some documents to people who were living there before the conflict, and we need to renew the Ukrainian broadcasting. We need to renew the opportunity to speak freely, to discuss some issues freely. And I think that that period will be I think it will take a few years to renew the normal conditions to having some elections or having even some discussions about elections. Yeah.
And why do you think does Vladimir Putin want this special status law to be enshrined into the Ukrainian constitution? What effect does that have, and how could Russia use that to their advantage, and what should Ukraine be looking out for?
They wanted to use it as an some element from outside which will be rebuilt in Ukrainian body on a permanent basis, and this element will affect on all Ukrainian political life, on all aspects of Ukrainian political life. I mean some new rules and new rights for the territories, and also Vladimir Putin is always underlines that amnesty is one of the most sufficient thing from him and for Russian Federation at all. He want us to give an amnesty to that people who were participating in such constructions as so-called Народная милиция of LPR and DPR, to affect our structures, which will be renewed after the elections, after the deoccupation. He wants us to give these people an amnesty, to allow them to live as usual Ukrainian citizens, but it's one of the red lines for President Zelensky and to any Ukrainian president.
Well, of course, it would have to be, really, because there would be huge protests if this was even accepted. And also, I mean, when it comes to the special status law, who is actually monitoring the fact that it's enforced or not? So we talk about elections, who is going to monitor the elections, even if it's the OSCE who monitor those elections, although they are fair. They claim to be a fair organisation, and they have 57 members who are involved in their organisation. They would be under a lot of pressure, really, to perhaps look away from certain things, or they would be intimidated. So, I mean, who would oversee, anyway, this special status, and when could it be judged that this law, if it comes into effect, could?
And again, we need to turn to the main issue for Ukraine, to the control of the state border. Here, to protect that people who will be participating in this election, we need to have a rule of law on that territories. Before it, we have, as you have mentioned, a lot of dangers of that people, a lot of dangers to be under pressure. And if we turn to the topic of OSCE, we need to remember that such episodes when the representatives of OSCE were not so neutral in their actions. If we will remember that situation with attending of the wedding of one of the daughters of representatives of such terrorist units by the representative of OSCE, and if we will remember that situation when the representative of OSCE was hugging with one of the terrorists, we just need to remember that, first of all, we need to provide security on that territories, and only after it we can tell some things about some sorts of democratical control and so on and so on.
Yeah, and the OSCE, I mean, they can't speak for themselves on this programme, but they do claim to be neutral. We do have another soundbite, actually, from another member of Parliament, this time from the Holos party, so we can have a listen to that now.
Загроз дуже багато, вони є очевидними.
There are many threats, and they are obvious, starting with the text of the bill, which is contrary to the Constitution, since it undermines sovereignty and territorial integrity. For example, one of the points allows separate areas of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions to sign separate agreements with Russia. They foresee a special procedure for the appointment of prosecutors and judges, the formation of a people's militia, and full amnesty.
So this is exactly what we were talking about, really, the fact that Russia really could take advantage of this special status law, and it could really harm Ukrainian national security and defense and all sorts. So how do you foresee this going forward, going into 2020? What do you think will happen with the special status law?
First of all, I think that Russian Federation will not follow the result of negotiations. Their point, especially the point of ceasefire, and it will be one of the most sufficient thing for us to turn attention of all of the world and to say that we can't adopt some political changes in our constitution, in our legislative, but still, if we will turn to the block of security, we will see that Russian Federation will try to influence to our political decision by security and also by humanitarian bloc, especially the release of detained persons, this release of prisoners of war, and all of these humanitarian things. And also, if we will remember the situation with the opening of new passes via bordering line, when it was the first part of withdrawal on first 3 points, especially in Zolotoye, we need to remember that Russian Federation and its proxies promised to us that they will open the new pass in Zolotoye. But now we can see the result of that promises, and I think that it will be also the part of the alliance and of their rhetorics. They will ask us, they will make an impression on us to adopt some political changes, and only after it they will promise us to open such passes as in Zolotoye, as they haven't opened by now, and it will be such things which will lead us to how should I say it?
Like a stalemate, almost.
Yeah.
Nothing. There won't be very much
nothing
movement.
will be happen with this.
Okay, Maria, thank you so much for coming into our studio and explaining more about the special status law.
Thank you for invitation again.
That was Maria Kucherenko. She is an analyst at the Centre for Civil Society Studies. Thanks for watching UATV. Stay tuned for more.